Good, just a little more effort, the midwife, Lilia, shouted in one of the rooms of the luxurious private clinic. Excellent. Sara, write it down, weight is 3,200 grams, baby girl. Young Sara, who was interning at the clinic, nervously jotted down everything the woman said on the card. Viola assisted Lilia in cutting the umbilical cord and handed the baby to the mother. Great job, Zoraida. What will you name her? Viola praised her patient, whom she had been caring for throughout her pregnancy. We decided to name her Marina, after my Kilo's grandmother, the girl said through tears. She was happy that Viola had been there to support her both physically and emotionally throughout her pregnancy. Zoraida never once doubted her decision to choose this clinic. It truly was the best. And even though it had cost her a significant amount of money, all 9 months had been comfortable, as had her labor and delivery. She gazed at her baby for a long moment and finally looked up at Viola, her midwife, for whom she was immensely grateful. Thank you, she whispered, and Viola smiled sincerely. Viola was one of the top obstetricians. She had participated in numerous conferences, meetings, and competitions and was indeed an experienced doctor. That's why she had a steady stream of customers. She worked in a private maternity clinic and was well compensated. However, whenever someone asked her if she wanted to open her own clinic, she shook her head, citing that it would bring more financial worries than the joy of working directly with patients, which she loved. After making sure that the mother and newborn were both doing well, she left the room, leaving them for less experienced but still capable professionals. Thanking everyone for their excellent work, she left the maternity ward and headed down the corridor toward her office. Another midwife joined her, carrying some documents in a brown folder. She seemed unusually pleased about something. Viola observed the mysterious, smiling expression on her face and decided to ask about what had happened. Finally. I thought you'd never ask, the girl squealed with joy and even jumped up like a child. They approved of me, Viola. At first, Viola didn't get what her colleague meant. However, recalling their conversation from a week ago, she immediately brightened up. What? Really? You finally have permission to adopt him? Yes, there were some paperwork issues. But Lupo helped me, and now we can't wait to become parents. Josefa, congratulations. You've come a long way for this. There will be another happy family. I'm so happy for you and Lupo. Tearing up with emotion, Josefa decided to hug Viola and thank her for being there when she made this decision. Josefa had never wanted to give birth, citing that it would ruin her body or that the child might be disabled. Despite the doctor's attempts to reassure her that technology had advanced and none of her fears would come true, she adamantly refused to have her own child. A month ago, she finally decided to start a family and adopt a child from an orphanage. Along with her husband, Lupo, she went through various adoption procedures, which were far from straightforward and had their own pitfalls, from paperwork to medical examinations. However, it took 3 weeks, and they finally received approval for adoption. She had already found a 7-year-old boy named Marco in one of the shelters. She knew instantly that this child would be like a real family member to her, and she was determined to adopt him no matter what. I'll be able to bring Marco home tomorrow. I'm so happy, Viola, she said as they walked down the hospital corridor. However, she saw a different expression on Viola's face than the one that had greeted her just a minute ago. Viola pretended to be happy for her friend, but she seemed to force her smile, and by the look in her eyes, it was evident she wasn't sincere. The girl walking beside her was growing increasingly concerned, and Josefa felt like Viola was on the verge of tears. She slowed her pace, and Viola automatically did the same, until they eventually stopped right in the middle of the corridor. The girl placed her hand on Viola's shoulder. Viola, did I share the news at a bad time? Josefa asked gently. Viola turned to her colleague and, no longer hiding her tears, replied, No, it's okay. Really? It's just that you're so happy, and everyone around me too, my friends, colleagues, clients, they all have families, and I feel so alone. Sweetie, Josefa could only respond before she hugged her friend tightly. She understood that her friend still couldn't come to terms with the fact that she was unable to conceive. Unlike Josefa, who could afford to have children but chose not to, Viola couldn't. Viola often shared her concerns about her infertility with Josefa, but all Josefa could do was offer comfort and suggest that she adopt a child from an orphanage. Viola had indeed contemplated it, but she hadn't taken any decisive action yet because she didn't just want a child, she wanted a family. Viola gently pulled Josefa away. She wiped away another tear and put on the mask of a strong and composed woman, one you wouldn't guess was so vulnerable at first glance. I'm sorry for these emotions. I am genuinely happy for you, my friend. Please don't think I'm envious or anything. I understand, Viola, and I'm sure you'll find your happiness. Just don't give up. In response, Viola smiled. Josefa decided to leave Viola alone with her thoughts, claiming that she was needed elsewhere with some documents. Viola continued on her way. Back in her office, Viola contemplated. She did support her friend and was open to the idea of having children herself. However, the one crucial difference between her and Josefa was that Josefa had a loving husband, something Viola couldn't boast of. It had always been a problem for her. She had a completely unremarkable appearance, even slightly off-putting. However, she compensated with her kind character and liveliness. Viola looked at herself in the mirror. She had curly red hair, a crooked nose with a bump, and asymmetrical eyebrows. She didn't like anything about her reflection. It had been a heavy burden that had accompanied Viola her entire life because, no matter what people said, appearance played a significant role. They judged the book by its cover. Due to this fact, she couldn't find a man. They all ran away after dates, with the last one not even bothering to invent an excuse. He simply stood up and walked out. Of course, if it were possible, like in a game, to show all her excellent qualities and attributes, Viola would have no equals. However, she lives not in a simulation but in the real world, where people only notice your soul when you attract them with your appearance. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Zoraida, who had given birth to a girl a few hours ago, came in. In her hands was a beautiful little package, and Viola immediately guessed that it was a gift for her efforts. At least somewhere, she was truly loved and appreciated. And here's our new mommy, Viola said joyfully, getting up from the table. She hugged the woman as tight as possible. It had only been a short time since the birth, but her patient was already on her feet, something other new mothers couldn't boast about. They usually rested for a long time, but Zoraida was a bold and resilient girl. You're up early, dear, the midwife said. Oh, I'm not tired at all. Thanks to you, Viola, the birth went so smoothly that I already want to take my little one for a walk with her. I'm so grateful to you for the kindness and care you've shown me for the past 9 months. The girl took out the little package and handed it to her doctor. Viola began to examine its contents carefully. I decided to buy you some useful oils and skincare products of excellent quality. You know me, I spare no expense on health, Zoraida said, smiling. Viola blushed, even a hint of surprise could be seen on her face. Her clients often gave her gifts, but Zoraida was special. When she sought help because she couldn't conceive a child, Viola happened to be on duty. She was already a qualified professional, but that month there were too many expectant mothers and all the midwives were busy, so Zoraida couldn't catch Viola. Her friend recommended her as the best. Undoubtedly, the girl was quite wealthy and could afford any other private clinic. However, she wanted to give birth here because she herself was born in this maternity ward. Still, Viola managed to spare an hour for her visitor, who came to the hospital every day hoping to find a doctor. You spend entire days in our department. I assume you're quite serious about this, darling? Viola asked the young girl. Please, help me, I want to give birth, specifically in this maternity ward. Yes, I know. That's why you came to me. I was told that you've been unable to conceive a child for a year now. Yes, please, help me. I won't spare any money. I've been assured that you can help me, the girl pleaded, almost crying. Viola looked at her sternly, then glanced at the documents again, adjusting her glasses. Zoraida, then, the midwife said thoughtfully, and then threw an assessing look at the poor girl. I don't care about the amount of money in your wallet. I will do everything possible. Follow the instructions, and you'll have a chance. Thank you, for God's sake. Thank you, Viola, Zoraida cried out. Memories poured like a waterfall in Viola's mind, the first ultrasound results, the long-awaited pregnancy. She had been infertile herself, but knew how to help the less fortunate who, like her, thirsted for family happiness. That's what her love for her work was all about, it was her outlet. Viola saved those who had even the slightest chance of success, and she always succeeded, sometimes with great difficulty. But she never gave up and eventually became the first doctor in the city who could cure infertility. She was talked about in newspapers, on television, and in advertisements. She was invited to all sorts of events, foundations, and shoots, and she hardly ever refused because she knew one truth her mother had told her long ago. If you can help, do it. Don't wait for a miracle, you are the miracle. All these thoughts moved Viola so deeply that she shed a tear, which Zoraida couldn't help but notice. Viola, what's wrong? Please, don't cry. If you didn't like the gift, But the doctor was stopped by the touch of the girl's hand. Zoraida, thank you for giving me a chance to feel needed again, Viola said through tears. The young mother smiled awkwardly and allowed herself to feel the moment, shedding tears herself. But you inspire many people, Viola. I hope you can find happiness too. I'll miss you, the girl said, and with these warm words, she left the office. Viola was once again alone. Today had turned out to be unexpectedly emotional for her, something she hadn't anticipated. However, she gathered herself, walked over to her desk, where her computer was, and immersed herself in work. It truly helped her distract herself from her own troubles. After 2 hours of uninterrupted work, she noticed a notification in the corner of her screen. By clicking on it, she was redirected to her email. She had received a message from the Medical Association of Physicians. It recommended that she attend professional development courses. It didn't surprise Viola. Even though she was one of the best midwives in the city, she often attended such courses because medical technology and knowledge were constantly evolving. To stay at the top, she needed to keep her theoretical and practical knowledge up to date. So she gladly responded to the email, confirming her attendance. The courses were scheduled to take place every evening, starting tomorrow, for 24 days. Viola found this schedule suitable, as she was always looking for something to occupy her evenings other than hanging out with friends. She had a lot of them, but often felt exhausted by their conversations. Most of them already had children, and half of her friends had given birth in the same clinic where she worked. Naturally, their discussions mostly revolved around their wonderful offspring, which plunged Viola into even deeper depression. After enrolling in the courses, the midwife resumed her meticulous work at the computer, which mainly involved filling out various paperwork. Viola despised these formalities as she preferred engaging in more meaningful tasks rather than dealing with paperwork, much like an accountant in an office. However, she had to comply with these requirements, and she had no choice but to obey. The knock at the door interrupted her tedious and hated work. This time, a nurse entered, bringing in new patient cards. Initially, Viola didn't even notice her arrival, but when the young intern was about to leave, opening the door, the midwife stopped her. "Marta, can you do me a favor?" Viola politely asked. The girl turned around and looked puzzled at the doctor. "Please, Marta, make a note at the reception that I will be absent every evening for a month per the order of the head physician of the department. I'll send all the documents to your email," Viola said with a smile. Marta looked at her sleepily, as if she were doing her a favor, and then left. Viola ignored the nurse's attitude. They did get tired on the job. When Viola was studying at the university, she also suffered from sleep deprivation, barely managing simple tasks, not to mention smiling. Unfortunately, becoming a doctor was a challenging journey, and, of course, a smile wouldn't solve everything. So she watched Marta with understanding as she left. Until tomorrow, Señorita Gonzalez, the night shift doctor shouted after her as Viola passed by on her way to the elevator. The words didn't sit well with her. Señorita. And even though Viola was only 30 years old, she felt like she would never become Señora, she would never have another last name, she would always be alone. With these thoughts in mind, she got into a taxi and headed home. She had a splendid apartment with a view of the entire city, located in the Central District. Viola often enjoyed sitting on the balcony with a cup of cocoa, gazing at the city's nighttime lights. "Mom's home," Viola called out, closing the front door. Her Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, a rather expensive pet, immediately came running to her call. But Viola didn't mind spending money on a companion that served as her friend, husband, and child. "Max, I'm sorry I took so long." "My boy, are you hungry?" Viola asked rhetorically. Unfortunately, instead of a human response, she received only a proud bark. "Let's go, my joy," the girl said, leading her puppy to the kitchen. Turning on the lights, she searched for Max's food and, to her surprise, found it. After pouring Max's food into his bowl, as he stared at the bowl with eager eyes, she opened a bottle of expensive wine, poured herself a glass, and headed to her favorite balcony. The view, which she observed almost every night, couldn't be described in just a few words. From the top of the skyscraper, she couldn't hear the noise of the cars, but she could watch them moving along the highway. Almost every window had lights on. Life was bustling before her eyes, and she was no longer dying of loneliness. She was savoring it and taking pride in the kind of life she was living, even if she was alone. Her dog's barking interrupted the train of her thoughts. It always did so when the phone rang. Who could be calling her at midnight? A doctor's work never truly ends, so she reluctantly approached the phone. "Viola Gonzalez, I'm listening," she answered. "Hello, Viola. I apologize for the late call. We need to confirm your registration for the courses." Viola started to get irritated. She hated it when people called her at this hour, especially for some formality. However, realizing that the consultant on the other end of the line wasn't to blame and was just doing their job, she replied, "Yes, I confirm that I will be attending starting tomorrow." "Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye." But Viola hung up, feeling quite annoyed by the phone call. Why couldn't they have called in the morning? In this mood, she went to bed. Entering the auditorium, Viola saw quite a few people. Were they all gynecologists and midwives? She took an empty seat next to another woman. Viola didn't pay much attention to her seatmate, but she did notice her beautiful dark hair tied in a ponytail. She was dressed quite casually, wearing a top and jeans, but it seemed appropriate for the occasion. For the next hour, there was a grave silence in the auditorium. Everyone listened attentively to the speaker, who didn't seem to be older than 35. "We'll conclude here for today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for coming," the speaker bid farewell to the doctors. People quickly started to gather their belongings, and as Viola packed her things into her bag, she noticed her seatmate's gaze and turned towards her. "Did the midnight call also wake you up?" the woman asked with a smile. "Yes, and I thought I was the only lucky one," Viola replied, still feeling groggy after the previous night. "Did it also ruin your mood?" The lively brunette persisted. "Yeah, because of that too," Viola replied in the same tone. She was about to get up and leave, but a sense of regret stopped her. She had been rude to her neighbor on the first day of their acquaintance. Perhaps they would be sitting together for a whole month, so she didn't want to spoil their relationship. "Sorry, it was a tough day. I had to perform 2 cesarean sections on mothers. It was difficult to control the process," she explained. "Is it your first time performing a C-section?" Viola was taken aback by the question. Did this girl doubt her qualifications? Perhaps she misunderstood her. "Oh, I was just kidding, don't worry. I get tired from my work every time." I love kids, but they can be so shy. It's like pulling words out of them with obstetric forceps, her seatmate continued with a smile. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Renata Borrego, she said, extending her hand for a handshake. Viola Gonzalez, obstetrician gynecologist, Viola replied, shaking her hand. So official, Renata added with a laugh. The two exchanged phone numbers and agreed to sit together again the next day. The new day passed without much incident. Viola didn't have much to do at work, she mainly dealt with paperwork. She was looking forward to meeting her new acquaintance, Renata, so as soon as the clock struck 7, Viola closed her laptop, locked her office, and rushed to the courses. They were being held not far from the maternity hospital where she worked. She only had to walk 1 block, but unfortunately, a heavy rain started, and Viola had nothing to shield herself with. However, just a few meters into her walk, a sudden umbrella appeared above her head, held by a person. It was Renata. Viola was surprised by her sudden appearance. How did you end up here? Viola wondered. I work nearby, in that hospital over there, the girl said, pointing to the northeast. Oh, it's the neighboring building to the clinic where I work. So, we're not just desk neighbors, Renata said, winking. Viola was still amazed that they had worked so close to each other all this time and had never met. She was starting to enjoy this girl's company more and more. After the seminar, her new friend suggested going to a cafe since it was Sunday tomorrow. Of course, working as a teenage gynecologist was easier than being an obstetrician. They had weekends, unlike Viola. However, Viola accepted the invitation because she had no grand plans for Sunday. There were no surgeries, deliveries, or meetings with new clients. All she had to do was fill out documents on the computer, which she really didn't want to do, and having a cup of coffee with a friend sounded like a great way to take a break. Hi, Viola said as she sat down at the table across from her friend. Did you wait for me long? She asked, noticing the half-empty coffee cup. Not too long, I just really wanted a drink, and they brought it already. Sorry about that. Apologies accepted, Viola said with a smile. Their initial conversation was awkward. It revolved around work, weather, and each other's well-being. However, it became more sincere when they discussed family matters. Viola suspected that their chat would eventually touch upon this sensitive topic, and she was prepared for it. Well, we've got that you love kids in a good way, Renata joked, making their time together more relaxed. Do you have children of your own, or are you planning to? Viola decided not to rush with her answer. She slowly brought the coffee cup to her lips and took a sip, trying to ignore Renata's eager gaze. No, I don't have children. Or, more accurately, she paused, struggling for words. I'm infertile, so I don't let myself think about having a family, she said firmly. She saw a look of discomfort in Renata's eyes. However, her new friend quickly recovered. What about the children from the orphanage? Or have you always dreamed only of your own children? Are you afraid you won't love them as much as if they were your own? Renata asked. I've thought about it, but I couldn't raise them alone. I wouldn't be able to handle it. Besides, my personal life has its own challenges right now, Viola replied. Oh, come on. You can handle it. I haven't seen my husband for 2 months. He's serving on a ship near the Japanese islands. And we rarely meet when he comes home. Either I'm working or he's busy, so I manage everything on my own. We even have 3 dogs. I understand they can't be compared to children, but children may wake you up at 6 in the morning, but they don't often ask you to go for a walk with them right away, or else they'll wet the hallway or your slippers, Renata said, laughing. So all the care for these little creatures lies on my delicate female shoulders, she concluded, taking another sip of freshly brewed coffee. You have pets too, right? Viola responded enthusiastically. I have a puppy, and he's always begging me to go for a walk, Renata. I suggest we walk with them together. Great idea, Viola. Remind me where you live. In the city center. So you're right in the center? Well done. For us to move there, it will take at least 5 more years to afford a small apartment on a mortgage. But I live not far from you. Do you know the street La Calle de los Flores? Of course, I always walk in the park and come out on that street. That same park. Viola, we've met for a reason. Starting with that meeting, the two girls became close friends. Renata was only 2 years younger than Viola, so they didn't feel any age difference. They became best friends and did almost everything together, leaving work, walking their pets, and visiting each other often. One day, they baked cookies together that ended up burning, and they laughed about the mishap for a long time. Viola was happier than ever. She thought she had plenty of friends until she met Renata. She was someone you could share all your problems with, knowing you wouldn't be judged, but would be understood and supported. In turn, Viola listened attentively to her friends' concerns about her relationship. It turned out that Renata had always dreamed of having a family and a cozy home filled with love. But when her husband was sent to serve in the East, their lives changed dramatically. All of Alejandro's promises that they would always stay in touch fell apart. He became more engrossed in his work and thought less about his wife, who patiently waited for him during their 2 years of marriage. This ate away at Renata from the inside, and although she didn't show it, she felt terrible. Viola did her best to distract her friend from her unenviable fate, and it worked until one fateful day that broke Renata. There was nothing unusual about that day. Both girls were busy with work and planned to go out for a walk in the evening. As they walked the streets, enjoying ice cream and making plans for the next day, the phone call interrupted their cheerful conversation. Renata answered the phone, stepping aside from her friend, still holding her ice cream cone. She replied with a smile. Listening. She didn't say anything more, but her facial expression darkened with each passing second. Viola sensed that something was wrong but hesitated to approach her friend until Renata dropped her ice cream cone and then collapsed onto the pavement herself. Viola rushed over and took Renata's phone, which she was barely holding, before squatting down in front of her. Renata didn't even raise her head as Viola took charge, forcing her to look at her by cupping her cheeks in her hands. Viola would remember that look for a long time, a completely vacant gaze of a shattered person. Her friend seemed to be looking right through her. Suddenly, Renata's eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness. Viola barely managed to catch her before her head hit the scorching pavement. She looked around and realized a crowd had gathered, as if it were some kind of show. "Are there any men who can help me?" she asked the crowd. Only one person came forward, a young man in his 20s, but he was quite strong. It was evident from his muscles bulging beneath his pristine white t-shirt. "Pick her up and help me get her to the car." "I'll call a taxi right now," Viola explained. The guy followed her instructions, and within 5 minutes, Viola was driving in the car with her unconscious friend lying on her lap. Viola couldn't quite understand what had shaken her so much. She was lost in speculation, but she convinced herself that she needed to provide first aid to her friend before thinking about the reasons behind her dreadful condition. She gave the taxi driver her address and asked for his help in carrying her friend to her apartment. The driver was reluctant but agreed to an additional fee. "Looks like you've got quite the party animal there. Miss, make sure to take good care of your friend," the taxi driver remarked as he dropped them off in front of the apartment. Viola could only muster a forced smile that seemed to scream, "Just leave." It appeared the taxi driver got the hint and left, wishing Viola a good night. Viola, on the other hand, struggled to carry her friend to the bed. She soon realized that dragging a drunk person required some serious physical fitness. After managing to remove Renata's shoes and jeans, Viola laid her head on a soft pillow and covered her with a blanket before collapsing next to her. The next morning, Viola woke up with a terrible headache. She checked her phone and saw 30 missed calls from Lilia, her colleague and fellow midwife. It was then that Viola realized the gravity of her situation. All her plans had gone out the window. She was supposed to be at the hospital by 7 in the morning because Maria, a soon-to-be mother who was scheduled for a cesarean section, was expected to arrive. Viola checked the clock, and it was already 11 a.m. She feared she might lose her job. Viola quickly got up and rushed to the kitchen, where she found Renata sitting at the table. Her friend still had that vacant look, seemingly oblivious to Viola's presence. "Renata," Viola cautiously called out to her. Her friend turned around, and Viola saw that same glassy, shattered gaze. Viola decided to sit down at the table and gently inquire about what had happened. She no longer cared about her job or the possibility of being fired. Right now, her concern was solely for her friend, who clearly needed help. A minute of silence passed, and just as Viola was about to say something, Renata finally spoke, almost in a whisper. "He's dead," she said softly. Viola was stunned by this news. Her eyes widened, and she started breathing deeply. She understood why her friend looked like a lifeless body. Alejandro had died. Those words hit Viola like bullets, over and over again. He was the only person who, despite being far away, had mentally supported Renata. She clung to him like a lifeline. He was the one who had loved her truly and deeply, even across the distance. "Renata, I'm so sorry." Viola began, but her friend didn't seem to be listening. "I feel sick," Renata suddenly blurted out and rushed to the bathroom. Viola could hear the sounds of vomiting. This news had hit her hard, as she had fainted the night before. Today, she had vomited. She understood that she now bore responsibility for her friend's condition, both physically and mentally. "I'm sorry, it was really awkward." "I'm in your apartment," Viola began to apologize as she returned to the table. While she spoke, she absent-mindedly rubbed her chin, which she had just washed. "It's okay," Viola nodded understandingly. She felt sorry for her friend, but didn't know what to say in situations like this. She didn't want to make things worse or more painful, so they had breakfast in silence. When Renata finally got ready, still without saying a word, Viola stopped her in the hallway. "I understand if you don't want to talk right now. But remember, you can always reach out to me for support. I'm here." "Thank you, Viola. You're my only comfort." "I love you," Renata replied, hugged her friend, and left the apartment, leaving a trace of her favorite lavender perfume behind. "Where have you been?" Lilia shouted, trying to catch up with Viola as she walked quickly, almost running. "I'm not going to discuss this with you, Lilia. I will outline the whole situation to the head physician. If you want, you can eavesdrop behind the door. Just be careful, otherwise, the adults might scold you," Viola replied sarcastically. Lilia had never liked her. As a person, she was very slippery, cunning, and sly, always eager to listen to gossip or start baseless rumors herself. The midwife didn't trust her with any secrets or news because the entire hospital would know about it within an hour, or even worse, the whole neighborhood. "You're being ruder than usual today," Lilia remarked. "I'm ready to be rude to you anytime, my dear, but not in front of my clients," Viola said, pointing at several girls sitting in the waiting area, waiting for their paperwork at the reception desk. "They won't be yours for much longer, Viola," the girl said meaningfully, then walked away in the opposite direction. Lilia and Viola had always been rivals at work. Both were highly qualified obstetricians, but Lilia primarily delivered babies. It was a task Viola didn't undertake. This led to constant arguments about who was better and who should be in charge of the maternity ward. And now, Viola made a mistake, and Lilia took over her clients, which infuriated Viola. She was in a rage. She feared losing her job for real. However, the circumstances that morning required her not to show up for work at the usual time. She couldn't leave her friend alone. Her conscience would torment her otherwise. But while Renata had a valid excuse for her absence, Viola had none. She hoped deep down that the head physician would understand the situation. "So, you skipped your work shift, didn't answer calls, and didn't even inform your superiors to support your friend," the head of the department scolded. "Yes, ma'am, that's right," Viola replied. "Are we in a daycare center?" The department head raised her voice. "Ma'am, I'm a qualified specialist," Viola tried to defend herself. "And because of that, Do you think you can now come to work whenever you please? Silence hung in the room. Viola didn't know how to respond to such a harsh question. Viola, the doctor began, I won't fire you, but I have to impose a punishment. You'll lose all the clients who wanted to schedule appointments with you this month, and you must pay a fine of 50,000 euros. This turn of events shocked the midwife. Paying the money was never a problem for her. However, what truly bothered her was the humiliation she felt over a single mistake. She'd rather have been fired than lose the clients she genuinely wanted to work with. She had another important question on her mind. Who will serve her clients then? Viola asked, receiving a harsh and irritating response. Lilia. She has the same qualifications as you, so she can easily be promoted to the role of an obstetrician, was the stern reply. Are you saying that you're demoting me? Yes, Viola, I'm demoting you. In our clinic, we need punctual and responsible doctors, and if everyone acts like you, our maternity ward won't be considered one of the best. But I missed work just once. Why such a harsh punishment? Don't my 10 years of continuous service count for anything? I don't want to speak with you like you're a schoolgirl, Viola. Right now, you're acting like one. If you don't want to make the situation worse, accept these new conditions and live with them peacefully. Viola gave the chief physician an indignant look once more. She couldn't believe that such a minor mistake would cost her the position of lead obstetrician, a role she had held for the past 5 years. Leaving the office, Viola spotted Lilia, who was standing to the right of the door. It seemed like she had taken the advice to eavesdrop on their conversation literally. It then occurred to Viola that Lilia probably already knew everything, as who else but Lilia would have reported her absence to the department head. It was dishonest, underhanded, and despicable. However, Viola couldn't do anything about it. Ignoring Lilia's triumphant look, she headed to her office. Viola tried to call Renata, but her friend didn't answer the phone. Viola concluded that the last thing Renata wanted to hear were words like everything would be fine. She hoped her friend was okay and had simply turned off her phone. However, the worry didn't dissipate, and Viola decided to go to bed. The next working day surprised Viola even more, or, to be precise, it was her friend's boldness that left a lasting impression. Viola, you're our lead obstetrician again, but I urge you not to be late for work and not to bother me with trivial matters, the head physician quickly said, barely opening Viola's office door. Viola didn't even get a good look at her face. Of course, she was shocked and pleased by this news. Within a minute, she rushed through the department, trying to find answers. Why? She asked loudly when she peered into the chief physician's office. Why did you change your decision? When the door swung open completely, Viola saw someone she never expected to see in this building. It was Renata. Her friend smiled at her and stood up from the chair. Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad we understand each other. And the girl went towards the exit of the office, meeting a shocked Viola along the way. Why did you do this? Viola asked as they walked down the corridor. You helped me, and when I found out about your problem, I decided to return the favor. We studied together. You didn't know that? She owes me a little, Renata smirked. The girls entered Viola's office. She sat down at the desk, and Renata settled into one of the client chairs. But that wasn't my goal from the beginning, Renata continued. I came to the hospital to share some news with you, but I overheard from the staff that you had been demoted, so I decided to find out the reason, and as you can see, not in vain. Viola seemed to have let Renata's entire speech pass by. What news? A silence fell in the office. It was evident that Renata was gathering her courage to announce something very important, otherwise, she wouldn't have come to the hospital during working hours and in such a state. I'm pregnant, Viola. Viola gave her friend a sidelong glance and sank even deeper into her chair, making it creak mournfully. She had expected everything, that Alejandro had survived or that Renata had information about where to retrieve his body. However, this revelation caught her completely off guard. She couldn't even imagine such a turn of events, and, of course, she felt even more sympathy for Renata, who had suddenly been burdened with so many problems. She wanted to hug her and support her, but all she said aloud was, "What is the gestation period?" 2 months, Renata replied. "I haven't seen Alejandro for exactly 2 months," the girl added, as if anticipating the next question. "So yes, it's his child, but I'm not here to hear tearful speeches and condolences about my loss." Viola sighed quietly with relief. She genuinely wanted to support her friend, but after all that had happened, she could only listen. "I came here," Renata continued, "to ask you to be my doctor. I want you to oversee my pregnancy from start to finish." Seeing Viola's eyes widen with each passing second, Renata added, "You're my friend, and I—" "Stop," Viola interrupted her. She approached her friend, hugged her tightly, and allowed herself to shed a tear. "I'll do everything for you, Renata." 2 months passed, and the two friends grew even closer. Viola helped Renata in any way she could. During an ultrasound, they found out that Renata was expecting twins. Finally, it was time to find out the gender of the babies. Viola suggested a gender reveal party where they could joyfully discover it together in a festive atmosphere. However, Renata declined. She still couldn't accept her husband's death, and she didn't want to have any celebrations without him. They had planned to do everything together, but their whole lives had collapsed in an instant. Renata couldn't bring herself to celebrate without him, and, of course, such a party wouldn't have ended with bright, genuine laughter. Renata frequently had breakdowns, and she wouldn't be able to hold back her emotions once she found out the genders of her children. "All right, everything is ready. You can lie down," Viola invited Renata to the examination table. She applied gel to Renata's abdomen and began moving the ultrasound probe while watching the screen where the image was forming. "Are you ready, Renata?" Viola asked. Her friend looked at her with a mixture of happiness and sorrow in her eyes. "Yes, go ahead. Say it." "You're having boys, twins, 2 baby boys," Viola announced. Renata screamed with joy and asked her friend to print their pictures. She was overwhelmed with happiness. It truly felt like a miracle. Months passed, and each day brought Renata immense joy about her impending motherhood. Viola helped her set up the nursery, and they bought cribs and various baby supplies. Viola even helped her friend financially. Finally, the day of the delivery arrived. "All right, I'll say it again, contractions are normal. Your water broke, and they're taking you to the delivery room," Viola reassured Renata as she was wheeled down the corridor on a stretcher. "Push, push," Lilia, the midwife, shouted as she helped deliver the first and then the second baby. Finally, Renata felt relief. Viola took the twins and placed them on their mother's chest. However, a few moments later, the monitor started beeping loudly, and all the doctors in the room rushed to action. "Blood pressure is dropping," the worried voices exclaimed. "She's lost too much blood. Give her medication, Sara." Panic set in. In the chaos, Renata grabbed Viola's forearm. Viola, though horrified by what was happening, collected all her strength and firmly squeezed her friend's hand. "Viola, I'm losing consciousness. Please, under no circumstances, give them to my parents. Promise me you'll take care of them. I'm begging you, don't give them to my parents. You don't know what they're like." Viola felt sheer horror at what was happening. She had never experienced a patient's death, and now, why did it have to be her only friend? But she knew what she had to do now. Although she was ready to panic, Viola gathered all her willpower and firmly grasped her friend's hand. "I promise, Renata, they'll be in good hands." As soon as Viola uttered those few words, Renata lost consciousness. They rushed to resuscitate her, and the twins were taken to a safe place. "Her heart is beating, and the rhythm is weak but stable. It seems she's in a coma," Lilia stated harshly. A month passed, and Renata remained in a coma. During this time, Viola felt completely drained. She went to work like a zombie and returned home in the same state, but 2 weeks ago, she had an idea, a crazy and frightening one, and Viola hardly believed in its success. However, she was ready to do it for her friend. She would steal the babies. It was undoubtedly a crime, but Viola couldn't see any other way. Viola quickly found buyers for the 2 apartments she owned, her own and the one she had inherited from her mother, at good prices. On the night of April 5th, exactly 1 month after the birth of the twins, the girl began to take action. First, Viola stayed at work, taking someone's night shift, which conveniently presented itself. She used this time to obtain birth certificates and forge documents. In the mother section, she added her own name, a task made possible because she had access to this documentation. Renata had also helped her here. If her friend hadn't persuaded the chief physician to keep Viola as the head obstetrician, she wouldn't have had the authority she now possessed. Viola was responsible for all the paperwork related to the babies born in the clinic, and this worked to her advantage. After treating the ward security guard to coffee with Irish cream liqueur, which was delicious but had a strong sedative effect, Viola managed to secure a few hours of freedom. By swiping her card through the electronic lock on the door leading to the oxygen supply room, she entered the premises and began searching for the infants listed under Renata Borrego. Once she found them, she carefully dressed each sleeping baby, covered their faces with oxygen masks, and placed them in a double stroller. Now, she had one more daunting task to accomplish that night, leaving the hospital. She didn't expect to go completely unnoticed, and she prayed that the security guard at the main entrance wouldn't pay attention to her until she could get into a taxi. Her wish came true. "Going for some fresh air?" the security guard asked with a grin as she approached the exit. Viola responded with an uncertain nod and hurriedly left the hospital. As Viola had anticipated, the security guard got agitated later and began running towards her as she was getting into a taxi, shouting, "You don't have any children." "Viola, stop. What are you doing?" But Viola let these cries fall on deaf ears. She was driven by adrenaline. She had succeeded. However, this was only the beginning of her plan. Now, while the drowsy taxi driver took her to her destination, Viola's main goal was to leave quickly and quietly so that the police and others wouldn't catch on until later. After paying the taxi driver twice the fare and hoping he wouldn't blab about the incident, which seemed unlikely since he appeared indifferent to it all, Viola watched the car pull away. She then opened the cover that concealed her BMW. Her loyal dog, Max, was waiting for her, and the twins continued to sleep peacefully. Apparently, no amount of commotion could wake them. Carefully placing them in the prepared sleeping area, Viola took her seat behind the wheel. Max settled in next to her. Together, they looked like a gang from a movie, with Max serving as her partner. Chuckling at her own thought, she put the car in reverse, turned around, and headed down the highway, gradually gaining speed with every passing second. She headed to the airport. Standing at the checkpoint, the girl was extremely nervous. However, she found solace in the fact that she looked like a real mother. "So, they were born 1 month ago, right?" asked the customs officer sternly. "That's correct, sir," replied Viola. The girl refrained from making any additional comments, afraid of saying anything unnecessary. "And what is the purpose of your trip?" "My friend and I had an agreement that when my babies turned 1 month old, I would come to visit her and introduce her to my little babies." "So, it's a visit to a friend?" "Yes, sir." The officer made a displeased face, but when he looked at the documents, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Safe travels, Señorita Gonzalez." Viola flashed him a smile and breathed a sigh of relief as soon as she crossed the line. He had referred to her as Mrs., signaling the start of a new chapter in her life, a happier one than before. She was ready for these changes. "So, little ones, this is our new apartment for the next 18 years, Viola declared when she finally received the keys to the apartment. The property Viola had acquired was very spacious, 4 bedrooms, a huge kitchen connected to the living room, and, of course, panoramic views of the city. Another window on the opposite side of the apartment offered a view of the strait. She had chosen this city for several reasons. Firstly, the country needed highly qualified doctors. Secondly, the warm climate she loved was perfect here. And thirdly, it was a cozy and vibrant city, which added a special charm. After putting the children in the cribs she had requested to be placed in the nursery before her arrival, she turned on the TV and sat down on the couch. As she suspected, the news channels were already buzzing with reports of the abducted twins. Exactly 24 hours had passed since her successful kidnapping, taking time zones into account. While her hometown was just waking up to listen to the horrifying news, Viola was enjoying a cup of delicious coffee in her new apartment, bathed in bright daylight. "Max, do you think it's time we changed our appearance?" Viola triumphantly said. Of course, a change in appearance wouldn't be quick, so Viola simply cut her long, thick hair into a beautiful short bob, which she dyed black. She was amazed at how much her hairstyle could transform her appearance. Viola no longer resembled the former obstetrician. Viola had moved here for a reason. In her childhood, her mother often took her on business trips, and they spent a lot of time in this city. Viola had learned the language on the streets of this city. This city had always been the one she remembered the most. She had always dreamed of living here, but her career had taken off in her hometown, and she had forgotten her childhood dreams. The city was teeming with tourists, and the population exceeded 14 million people. It was easy to hide from the police here, who were still searching for her. Who would pay attention to a mother with 2 infants? There were thousands of them. Sometimes people would inquire about the father of her children, to which Viola would respond that he had tragically died on a submarine, which was true. However, there was one crucial detail: he wasn't her husband, and she didn't even know what he looked like, but nobody needed to know that. Yet Viola often thought about a drastic change in her appearance. She could get a new haircut and wear makeup differently, but her facial features remained the same, and she needed to change that. Finally, after a few months of living in her new place, Viola decided to take that step. She invested a part of the money she received from selling her property and car into her face, her new, beautiful face that she truly loved. She was no longer the hideous woman nobody wanted to meet. Now, she was a beautiful woman with a straightforward nose, high cheekbones, thick eyebrows, nearly black eyes thanks to contact lenses, and naturally tanned skin. And now she was already the heroine of a TV series. All men's eyes were on her. As she walked through the city streets, many wanted to talk to her. However, she couldn't risk her position, as she could be exposed at any moment, despite her change in appearance. So she lived for several years. Her peaceful and happy life as a single mother brought her nothing but joy. Over these years, she had risen to the position of a leading obstetrician-gynecologist and was once again in charge of the department. She had improved her language skills to the point where she was nearly indistinguishable from a native speaker. She named the boys Michaelo and Rocio. These 2 names held special significance for her. Her beloved uncle was named Michaelo, and Rocio was her father, who tragically died in a car accident. The boys were growing up well-behaved and obedient. She had always loved children, so she knew how to raise them. They spoke both English and Spanish fluently and correctly. This year, they were supposed to start school. Despite the fact that the children spoke 2 languages, Viola decided to enroll them in a school for foreigners where instruction was conducted in English. She hoped her children would want to travel, and for that, they would need a well-developed command of English, the world's primary international language. "All the documents are in the rehabilitation department," the nurse said, leaving the room. Viola had no choice but to go and retrieve them. Passing by one of the rooms, she noticed a handsome man through the door crack, and for some reason, she decided to take a peek. She didn't know what motivated her actions, but she felt an instinctual pull towards the door. He was a muscular brunette, evident from the bulging muscles barely concealed by his hospital gown, which did little to cover his powerful physique. There was a scar on his temple, and he was gripping and releasing rubber bands attached to each of his fingers with his hand. He clenched his fist and released it, and these actions captivated Viola with their beauty. Then Viola saw a coach who had been giving these macho instructions throughout the session. Suddenly, the man looked straight into her eyes. She immediately closed the door and, feeling embarrassed like a schoolgirl, walked further down the corridor, not understanding why this man had stirred such feelings in her. A couple of days passed after that incident, and Viola found herself back in that department. She needed to sign some documents at the registration desk, but deep down, she secretly hoped to meet that handsome man again. Her wish came true. While she was signing yet another document, the stranger approached the counter and stood next to Viola. She pretended not to notice him and tried to hide her smile. "Hey," the man cleared his throat, "so, you work here?" Viola continued to act as if she were very busy and carefully examined the documents. Only for a brief moment did she glance at him and replied, "Yes, sir," before immersing herself in the paperwork again. However, that brief glance from his beautiful blue eyes was enough to make her heart race. She even feared that her heartbeats were too loud and hurriedly made an excuse to leave, citing urgent matters. In the following days, Viola started visiting the rehabilitation department more often, always volunteering to pick up some paperwork or help out, even though it was not her responsibility. "Viola, what's gotten into you?" her friend at the registration desk asked one day. Since they saw each other almost every day, they could already be considered friends. However, Viola did not allow any close connections. She was broken after her friendship with Renata tragically ended. "Excuse me?" Viola replied. "Oh, come on, it's hard not to notice how you look at him. Besides, you've been showing up here every day, even though your department is in a completely different part of the hospital. Is it that obvious?" Viola became quite flustered. "Not to everyone, just to me and maybe to him," the receptionist replied with a sly grin. Viola initially didn't understand why she had chuckled like that, but following her gaze, she turned around and saw him, the man of her dreams. She had already admitted to herself that she was head over heels in love with him, even though she didn't know his name. Viola felt incredibly embarrassed, as if she were a teenager in love at school. "All right, I can help," the girl offered. "But I'm not a matchmaker, I'll just tell you what I know. Interested?" "Of course, I'm interested," Viola agreed, but it seemed like she spoke too loudly because some of the visitors turned to look at her. "Yes," the girl said more quietly. "His name is Antonio, and he's been undergoing rehabilitation here for a month. He's had one of his feet amputated. No one knows why, but all our nurses are very eager to find out what terrible thing happened in his life." "What nurses?" Viola asked. "Oh, you're not the only contender for the role of his girlfriend," the girl said. "Okay, he's handsome, that's a fact, and the lack of a limb doesn't interfere with other physiological abilities. If you know what I mean," the girl added with a wink. "You're quite cheeky, Isadora." "Perhaps. In any case, I advise you to act quickly, or they'll snatch this demigod away." Viola was taken aback by the new details. Firstly, she finally learned her beloved's name. However, she was annoyed by the audacity of the nurses. After signing the documents once again, she dragged them to the maternity ward. In a moment, all the papers ended up on the floor. "Oh, my God. I'm so sorry. Please, I didn't notice you," a deep, low voice spoke. Viola looked at the person and nearly fainted. It was Antonio. His blue eyes, as vast as the sky, were staring right at her. She could barely breathe. "It's okay, it's my fault. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going," she managed to say. "Maybe I can make it up to you with a cup of delicious coffee?" the man suggested. "Coffee?" the girl asked hesitantly. "There's a wonderful coffee shop up ahead. You work in this hospital, right? Have you ever been there?" The woman didn't bother explaining to him that she worked in a completely different department and only came here for him. Instead, she replied, "Of course, I have my lunch break right now." And then he started swaying back and forth to try to keep his balance. Antonio concluded his story with a laugh. Viola had been laughing nonstop for about 20 minutes. She didn't expect their conversation to be so wonderfully carefree. From their very first meeting, or rather, not exactly a meeting since they were just having coffee at the clinic's cafe and barely eating cheesecakes, for Viola, it felt like a romantic date. These coffee breaks became more frequent, and soon enough, he invited her to have dinner in a restaurant instead of the cafe, claiming he wanted to spice up his dull hospital life. But Viola knew it was a real date, the one she had been waiting for. They started spending weekends together, enjoying ice cream, watching sunsets by the bay, and Viola felt like she had finally found love, true love, reciprocated love. She introduced him to her children, and Antonio immediately bonded with them. They spoke English and Spanish fluently and correctly, thanks to Viola's guidance. 2 months into these meetings and encounters, the man of her dreams proposed to her. Their wedding was scheduled for the end of the month. Viola took the event very seriously. Most of her time was spent choosing a wedding dress and envisioning herself as a bride, while Antonio handled everything else. He was financially well off after his military service, and although Viola never learned about his past because it was a sensitive topic for him, she was happy to be with such a wonderful man whom she loved and who loved her in return. The wedding was modest. There were only their closest friends, or rather, acquaintances and colleagues, along with Viola's children. Nevertheless, it was a truly beautiful wedding for two people in love. Antonio embraced her children as his own and began raising them as well as Viola did. They were wonderful parents and a very close-knit family filled with love, warmth, and tranquility. However, their happiness was short-lived. On an ordinary, unremarkable day, the couple noticed that they were being followed. Nothing extraordinary seemed to be happening, but the unsettling feeling that they were not alone never left them. There was always another car following them with different license plates, but always black with tinted windows. They heard cautious footsteps behind them, and suspicious individuals lingered near their apartment building. They prohibited their children from going out after 9 p.m. when it began to get dark. Viola thought it might be paranoia. She had never told her husband about her past, just as he had never revealed his. He knew nothing about her children or where she came from, so the surveillance was deeply troubling. What if the authorities had finally found her? It seemed inconceivable after so many peaceful years. Antonio reassured her, suggesting it was probably just her nerves acting up due to her job and that these strange occurrences were mere figments of her imagination. However, 2 days later, their worst fears were confirmed. Viola was in the kitchen, baking cookies with her children, when the doorbell rang. It's probably Antonio returning from his walk with the dog, and he forgot his keys, Viola thought. "Rocio, sunshine, please open the door for Dad." "My hands are in dough," she asked her daughter. The boy rushed to the door, excited to welcome his father back after his walk. Antonio hadn't taken the children with him because they were feeling slightly under the weather, and Rocio was already missing him. But when Rocio opened the door, she was taken aback. Instead of the father, there was a man in a black cap and a dark suit standing there. It wasn't her father. The man seemed out of place wearing such attire during the summer in the city. "Mom, can you come here?" Rocio called out to her mother. Viola was a bit irritated because she had to quickly wash her hands free of sticky dough. She left my kilo to watch over the cookies in the oven and approached her son. "Yes, sweetheart, what's wrong?" But all her questions disappeared when she saw the man in the suit. She realized it was the end, they had found her. However, she didn't lose her composure and dared to speak to the stranger first. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" Viola asked sternly, hugging her son's shoulders and silently reassuring him that she was with him and he was safe. "Viola Gonzalez?" "Yes, Mr. Gabriel Santos, private detective. May I come in?" The man didn't wait for a response and assumed he had been allowed in, so he attempted to cross the threshold. However, Viola stopped him. "No, I won't allow it until you tell me the purpose of your visit," Viola said in a stern tone. "I came regarding Renata Borrego. Are you acquainted with her?" Viola felt dizzy, her head spinning, and a wave of nausea swept over her. She tried to maintain her composure and quickly replied, "Please, come in." Viola led the man into the living room and asked her children to stay in their rooms. They certainly shouldn't hear this conversation, but she was most concerned about her husband. If he found out everything, it would be a disaster. She seated the unexpected guest on the couch and offered him coffee or something stronger, but received a polite refusal. Viola then fetched a cold drink from the minibar and poured herself a glass. "I'm listening," Viola said, cautiously sitting down on the couch. "I understand that you are aware of the situation, and there's no need to explain anything to you." Viola perfectly understood what was happening, but she had no idea whose interests this man represented. If he was a private detective, that meant he wasn't working for the government. "No, sir, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Viola replied, pretending to be clueless. "Very well," the man began, crossing his fingers. "Then let's start from the beginning, and I'll repeat my question. Are you familiar with Renata Borrego?" Here, the midwife decided not to deceive him further. "Yes, or rather, I used to be acquainted with her." "Then you must surely understand the essence of our conversation. I represent an organization that specializes in finding missing people. 3 years ago, an elderly couple came to me and asked for my help. They were Renata's parents, and they have been searching for their kidnapped grandchildren for many years. They had lost all hope of success. However, as I mentioned earlier, I am a private detective, and dealing with such matters falls within my competence." The detective changed his posture, crossing one leg over the other. At this moment, Viola heard footsteps. Viola, her shocked husband, called out to her, "Who is this? Where are the children?" Viola took a deep breath, knowing that a difficult conversation awaited her. Most likely, it would lead to shouting and relationship disputes. She was ready for it. "The children are in their rooms, dear. This is a private detective. Please have a seat and try to understand the situation calmly." Antonio nervously sat down on the couch and stared at the man as if he were his wife's lover. Realizing that this man was indeed who he claimed to be, he nodded as if to signal the detective to start his speech. "I assume you are her husband. But it doesn't matter. I'll continue. An unfortunate mother fell into a coma after giving birth 8 years ago. A month later, her newborn twins were kidnapped." The man emphasized the word twins. "The police and authorities tried to locate the kidnapper for a long time, but they didn't succeed. A year later, the poor mother regained consciousness and came to. Her parents then launched an active search for their grandchildren, which once again led to dismal results. They decided to turn to me, and I was finally able to close this terribly difficult and convoluted case. Sir, please hold on. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how any of this relates to my wife and me or what you're doing in my house. Mister, I was hoping your wife had shared her past with you, but it seems I'll have to do that for her. Without a doubt, this will be twice as painful for you both. You two make quite the pair. You're just like Mr. and Mrs. Smith." He added mockingly. 1-to-1, except with different backstories. Well, I will shed light on each other's dark secrets, and I hope there won't be a fierce battle here afterward. Remember, there are children in the house. The couple looked at each other in bewilderment. Their eyes conveyed questions and fear, especially the fear of being exposed. So, Viola, let's start with you. The first, and what I believe to be the most important thing you should know about your husband, is his real name. Your Antonio is not actually Antonio. He changed his name. He used to be called Alejandro, and he's the legal husband of your old friend, Renata Borrego. Yes, that's right. You were aware that he was dead, weren't you? I understand. However, he survived that horrible explosion. Do you wonder why he had his foot amputated? Fear was evident in Viola's eyes. She was in a state of shock, unable to process the information she was receiving. Her husband was not only her husband, but also the husband of her best friend, whom she believed to be deceased. Her husband was alive? However, 8 years ago, they were informed that he had perished on a submarine. Antonio, or, as we've now established, Alejandro, you should know that the children you believe to be her biological children are actually yours with Renata. Viola was the kidnapper. She took them that night. It was her request. She asked me to do it, Viola shouted in response. Alejandro was equally shocked by the continuous revelations. Not only had his wife been lying to him all this time, but his former wife, whom he believed had died during childbirth, was alive and well and still legally his spouse. The man looked at Viola, and a single tear rolled down his beloved's cheek. Today, both of them discovered things about each other that they should never have known, things that were supposed to stay in the past forever. But it seemed that life enjoyed throwing unexpected surprises their way. I suppose you both have a lot to think about now. The trial for this case is set for next Monday. Exactly 1 week. Don't try to run away or take any action. You've already been found, and now there's nowhere to hide. This especially applies to you, Viola. We will find you quickly, no matter where you are in the world. Oh, and one more little clarification, the detective added mockingly, already preparing to leave the apartment. I forgot to mention that both of you are under house arrest and your apartment is under round-the-clock surveillance. But why didn't Renata find me during all this time? Why didn't she tell me that she had come out of the coma? Viola asked in a pleading tone as she watched the man who had just torn her life apart leave. I can't say for sure, sweetheart. But think about it yourself. Who would want to have a friendly chat with the kidnapper of their own children? But I didn't kidnap them, the woman exclaimed. You'll have to prove that in court. I imagine the rest of your day will be quite interesting. I believe I've changed a lot in your relationship. Bastard, Viola whispered. Now please explain to me what that was all about, the man said as the door closed behind the unexpected visitor. First, how the hell are you alive? No, seriously, how did you survive? Renata said you blew up on a submarine. A Japanese ship picked me up, Alejandro said, his voice calmer. I had to amputate my mangled foot and undergo a long recovery, but I'm alive. I tried for a long time to contact Renata, but due to my illness, it was very difficult. I didn't even remember who I was at first, but then an opportunity arose, and I went back home to my hometown. I immediately went to Renata, my wife, but her parents, who have always been terrible tyrants and despots, told me that she had died during childbirth, and the child didn't survive either. And then, to forget my grief, I started traveling the world and ended up here, where I met you, the man said sorrowfully and pensively. My God, Viola could only manage to say. Viola, I'm sorry, but I need some time alone. Don't expect me tonight. I'll book a hotel room. Tell my children that I love them. So that's it? Does this mean it's over? Viola screamed in anger. Now you're taking my children away from me? Now they're only your children? They've always been mine, and you have no connection to them, the man angrily replied, and with those words, he slammed the front door. Viola almost collapsed onto the couch and buried her head in her hands. She wanted to cry, to jump out of the window, but she understood that none of that would change anything. Her boys were here, and they needed her. She had to resolve the situation she had created as soon as possible. Would she ever be able to be happy? The man she loved more than life turned out to be the husband of her best friend and the father of her children. She had contemplated this idea many times and couldn't find an explanation. Why had life been so cruel to her? Didn't she deserve simple family happiness? And in one moment, Viola finally had an idea. She found an old address book, dialed the right number, and waited for it to ring. You've called Renata Borrego. Leave a message because I'm busy and can't answer your call right now, a voice on the other end of the line said, and the call went to voicemail. Viola hated her for not liking to speak words into the soulless mechanical void, leaving them unanswered. But today, she had no choice. Hello, Renata. This is Viola. Viola Gonzalez, your best friend. Your former best friend, Viola clarified bitterly. Call me back as soon as you can. I need to discuss something with you. She pressed the end call button, and now all that was left was to wait for the call. She lifted her head and saw my kilo. Mom, where's that man? Why hasn't Dad come back yet? Her son asked. Dad won't come today, honey. He was called to work, the girl lied, a tear rolling down her cheek. Mom, are you crying? The boy asked with concern, running to his distressed mother. Did Dad upset you? Yes? I'm sure he didn't mean to, Mom. Everything will be okay. Viola burst into tears. She had never let herself show weakness in front of her children. However, today Viola just couldn't hold back the tears. Mikelo leaned his head on his mother's shoulder. He felt very sorry for her, but he didn't know how to help. Is Rocio sleeping? Viola asked after a while, her emotions somewhat calmer. Yes, he always naps at noon. You know that, Mikelo smiled. The woman sadly smiled at her son. Would she lose these beautiful beings who could bring happiness even on the worst days? She couldn't believe that all of this was happening to her. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but she understood that it was a cruel reality. A reality she would have to live with from now on. Wandering aimlessly around the apartment, Viola glanced at her phone. There was one notification, a voicemail. You didn't need to be a detective to understand that it was from Renata. She pressed play. Hello, Viola. I suggest we meet tomorrow at 3:30 for a cup of coffee at the Mickey Mouse Family Cafe. That was the end of the message. Renata was not one to say much. Viola realized she was in for a difficult meeting, one that could profoundly impact her future. The next day, Viola woke up very early. She had never been able to sleep more than 6 hours, it was a medical habit. But after yesterday, which had turned her life upside down, she had barely managed to fall asleep and dozed off just before dawn, leaving her with a splitting headache. Antonio Alejandro hadn't returned, and she had no idea where he was today. She had taken a day off from work. All morning, she didn't know what to do with herself. After making breakfast for the children and sending them off to school, she was left alone at home. Viola turned on the television and started watching an endless series. It was her way of disconnecting from the real world when she was stressed. Today, it seemed like time was dragging on forever. 6 hours had passed. The children had already returned from school, she had fed them lunch and sent them to do their homework. Time seemed to drag on endlessly. Finally, the clock struck 3 times, and Viola was able to leave the house at last. A person in black was again lurking near her home, but they didn't interfere with her. Apparently, this meeting at the cafe was part of their shared plan. It was only 1 block away from her. Viola had been waiting for this meeting all day. However, when the time came, she reluctantly made her way to the cafe. Arriving at the appointed time, she hesitated for a moment at the entrance but, mustering all her willpower, pushed the door open. She immediately saw her, Renata. She was wearing the same dress she had worn the first time they met in the cafe to get better acquainted. Viola wanted to create a sense of déjà vu. Well, she succeeded. They hadn't seen each other for 8 years. Incredible. Renata seemed to want to mock her or exert some pressure by doing this. Taking another deep breath, Viola approached the table where her former friend sat. Renata looked exhausted and thinner. Apparently, a whole year in a coma had taken a toll on her health. Suddenly, Viola realized that her former friend wouldn't be able to recognize her with a different face. Hi, Renata. It's me, Viola, she said as warmly as possible as she approached the table. Hello, Renata replied dryly. Her voice lacked any emotion. Once again, silence hung between them, just like the very first time. You probably didn't suggest meeting just for small talk, Viola broke the silence again. Yes, sorry. I'm just collecting my thoughts. You look different, her former friend observed. Yes, plastic surgery works wonders. You probably used it to seduce my husband. Why are you saying this? This doesn't sound like you, Renata. A lot has changed since you kidnapped my children. I didn't kidnap them. How dare you accuse me when you yourself asked me to take care of them and not give them to your parents? That was clearly said in the heat of the moment, and you should have understood that. I never asked you to steal my children and run away with them. I gave birth to them in pain. I was still in shock from my husband's death. And what did you do? You decided to take advantage of the situation to make them yours. But, dear, I want to disappoint you. I'm taking my little ones back. In 6 days, there's a court hearing, and it will undoubtedly return my babies to me. So, if you want to say goodbye to the children properly, you have 6 days. Renata, how can you be so cruel? Think about the children. They don't even know that I'm not their biological mother. To them, you'll be a stranger, nothing more. You can take the children back, but you won't be able to get their love now. That's none of your business anymore, Viola. I've said everything I wanted to say. The conversation is over. Renata abruptly stood up from the table, threw some money onto it, and hurried towards the exit, leaving Viola alone. 6 days, 6 days. Kept running through Viola's head. She had only 1 week to somehow resolve the problems that had fallen upon her. When she returned home, she saw her husband standing by the panoramic window, drinking something from a tall glass. Viola approached him carefully. "Isn't it a bit early to have a drink?" she asked as she poured herself some wine. "In these circumstances, it is the most appropriate decision," the man said calmly. "Why didn't you tell me your real name, even after we got married?" Viola asked. "I wanted to leave the past behind, Viola. I wanted to start a new life with you and the children. Everything was going so well until that damn detective showed up. God, Viola, I'm so tired of this nightmare." "I know, Antonio, I am too," the woman said. She wanted to support him and remind him of their love. The man approached and embraced his wife. He didn't know what to do. Should he go back to his former wife and take the children? But according to the documents, he had no legal connection to them. He was now a different person, Antonio Valiente, a different identity, and their father had died on a submarine 8 years ago. On the other hand, he didn't want to abandon his second wife. He had truly fallen in love, and he didn't want to destroy this marriage. He simply had no idea how to navigate this seemingly hopeless situation. Almost all the allotted days had passed without notice. Viola never found the courage to tell the children that she wasn't their biological mother. However, she and Alejandro decided to tell them something, anything, to explain why there was a court hearing on Sunday and why some stranger might take them away. They came up with a story about how they urgently needed to leave with their father, and the children might have to live with a foster mother for a while. It happens sometimes, it's normal, they tried to reassure their sons. Initially, the boys resisted, but after a while, they reluctantly accepted the fact. In this household, everyone now waited for the court date, each coping in their own way. Viola continuously watched television, Alejandro drank and slept, and the children had stopped doing their homework, spending whole days playing computer games, experiencing tremendous stress. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. The trial took place in their hometown since both Viola and Alejandro were still citizens of their country. They were escorted to the courtroom by police officers who had come for this purpose. Silence in the court, the judge's stern voice interrupted the chatter and noise. "Based on all the circumstances listed, we, the judges, have reached a decision. The court sentences Viola Gonzalez to 15 years of imprisonment for the charges of child abduction, obstruction of lawful authority, and forgery of documents. The children will remain with their biological parents, Alejandro and Renata Borrego." In the courtroom, a hustle and bustle erupted. Many were shocked by the judge's decision to separate the children from their mother, who had raised them for 8 years. It was considered a crime in itself, especially by those who had known Viola well before. Once again, the sound of the judge's gavel echoed in the room, silencing everyone. An appeal of the court's decision can be filed in 2 months, and until then, the guilty party will be held in custody, declared the judge. Alejandro scanned the room, searching for his beloved Viola. However, when he saw that she was being restrained by 2 officers and led towards the exit, he nearly burst into tears. All he could catch was her devastated look, the gaze of someone who had lost all hope. A light hand rested on his shoulder, and when he turned around, he saw Renata holding their children by the hands. "It's time for us to go home, my dear," she stated. The first month with their new family was agonizing for Alejandro. They had moved into Renata's parents' house, which was located far from the city center and resembled more of a ruin than a home. The house looked simply dreadful, with peeling wallpaper, water stains on the mirrors, and stubborn dirt on the creaking parquet floors, some of which had already rotted away. The children were given a shared room that was hardly bigger than a utility closet. They didn't warm up to their new mother. In general, she proved to be an ineffectual wife and mother. Most of the childcare was carried out by their grandparents, who were strict and tyrannical in their household rules. If they dropped a cookie, they should have eaten it and dusted it off, and they wouldn't get another one for a month. If they misbehaved, they'd stand in the corner or, worse, lose their meal. Another failing grade? Renata's mother shouted at my kilo. "I pay a fortune for you. How dare you perform so poorly in school?" "You're not paying for me, madam. My father provides for me," the boy replied proudly. "Come here, you little brat. Your father abandoned your real mother. She's left all alone. That wretch, Viola, completely spoiled you. I'll beat all the nonsense out of you," the insane grandmother continued, berating the crying child. Seeing this scene, Alejandro shielded the boy with his body. "How dare you shout at my son?" He sternly addressed his wife. "He's a lazy, insolent little boy, just like Rocio. They've been indoctrinated with nonsense for 8 years, and now it's time to re-educate them into good Christians." "You're insane," Alejandro said and turned away, leading his son to his room on the 2nd floor. "You saw what your mother did, didn't you?" he asked Renata, who was glued to the television. Empty beer bottles and cookie crumbs littered the couch. She hadn't worked anywhere and hadn't done anything around the house. "I have the right. And you should get your children under control and go to work," she replied. Alejandro shook his head in despair, leaving the room, which resembled more of a den than a living space. "Enough is enough," he muttered. However, seeing that Renata wasn't even listening, he walked away and swore to himself that he would find a way out of this nightmare and take his children away from here. Alejandro tried to spend as much time as possible with the children to shield them from the sadistic treatment they received from his in-laws. However, when he had to leave for work, they were subjected to mistreatment by Renata and her parents. He couldn't fully protect his children from this household of tormentors, and he couldn't take them away from this nightmarish house either. According to the court's decision, he and Renata were required to raise the children together, and social workers verified this fact every 2 weeks. Furthermore, Renata showed no interest in leaving her parents' home. More and more, he found himself thinking about Viola's well-being. How was she? Was everything okay with her? How was she coping with this situation? He didn't even have the right to visit her, as he had been prohibited from doing so. Alejandro was consumed by despair. He loved Viola more than life itself. He had been head over heels in love with Renata before, but she had changed. She wasn't the same sweet and cheerful girl he had met at a party many years ago. Everything had changed since then, and life was now divided into before and after. He had decided to take action. He found a good lawyer in town who could help with the case, even though he had to spend a significant portion of his insurance payouts for injuries. It was worth it. The lawyer said there was a chance. The time for filing the appeal was approaching. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Another fateful week lay ahead. "Dad, when can we see our mommy?" Rocio asked one day. Every day, the children heard Renata's rants about Viola, but they couldn't believe that this strange woman with a bloated face from perpetual drinking was their real mother. For them, Viola was and would always be their beloved mommy. Soon, my dear, very soon, Alejandro said, as he built a structure from toy blocks. He often sat with the children, played with them, read them books, and took long walks in the vicinity. He couldn't let them come across Renata or, worse, her despotic, half-mad parents. We'll try to win this case and go back to how things were before, without all this nightmare, Alejandro promised himself. Is it true that our mom isn't our real mother? Michaelo asked. Grandma said that Viola's mom destroyed us and our childhood. Oh, God, Michaelo, don't listen to that crazy old woman. I promise we'll get out of this place soon, bring back our mom, and be happy again. Michaelo, Rocio, Alejandro, dinner is ready, Renata shouted from downstairs. So, guys, it's time for us to go. I hope you understand me, Alejandro said, getting up from his knees. Next week is the trial. I hope you've prepared all the documents, Renata asked with her mouth full, devouring another serving of sausages and beans. Alejandro didn't inform his wife that he would be testifying against her in court. She would find out during the process. If he had told her now, she might have done something to the children. More and more, she reminded him of a maniac, capable of anything. That crazy look, those strange behaviors, could a person change so much? Yes, everything's ready, Alejandro replied tersely. The rest of the dinner passed in chilly silence. The children occasionally glanced at their father, as if trying to understand what he had in mind and how he would bring their beloved mommy back. But Alejandro only winked at one of the boys, which reassured them. Their father was on their side, he wouldn't let anything happen to them and would keep his promises. The week leading up to the new trial passed very quickly. During this time, nothing terrible happened, but nothing good either. Renata was sinking deeper into alcoholism and was no longer able to take care of herself, let alone the children. Even Alejandro felt sorry for her now, her alcoholic dependence seemed pitiable. She had endured the pregnancies, given birth to the children in pain, and immediately afterward lost an entire year of her life, spending it in a hospital bed. When she finally woke up, there was no one familiar by her side, neither her babies, her friend, nor her husband. Only her despotic parents remained, whom she had tried to avoid with all her might in the past. Over the years, they had changed her significantly and had a profound impact on her worldview. The joyful and determined young woman she used to be was no longer there. Instead, there was a grumpy, angry, and narrow-minded woman with an alcohol addiction. Alejandro understood that she needed help, but any discussions about it ended in arguments. Are you trying to say that I'm not worthy of our children? Renata would shout. It's all your fault. You died, damn you, and then came back to life. And to top it off, you married that scab. May she be cursed. You both ruined my entire life, you took my life away. Yes, you and that Viola. Don't you dare call her such names, Alejandro intervened. Oh, I almost forgot. You and her have an otherworldly love, slurred the woman, who then started hiccuping. And where's your love? In prison, rotting away. I saved those poor boys, I saved you. Without me, you would. Without you, we would have lived just as happily, Alejandro concluded and left the bedroom, where the air was filled with the stench of dirty laundry, alcohol, and cigarettes. It had been exactly 2 months since Alejandro last saw Viola. He hoped to find her in good health, lively, and well. He dressed nicely and prepared for another challenging day in his life. Renata would be furious when she found out that her husband was testifying for Viola's defense, and he was prepared for her condemning glares. There were a lot of people in the courtroom, all terribly interested in how this tangled case would end. 3 knocks of the gavel followed, and silence fell. Please, everyone, take your seats. Thank you, the judge said, attentively reviewing some documents on the desk, then scanning the room with a stern look. I call upon the prosecution. A buzz of anticipation arose as specific individuals made their way to the center of the room. Alongside the prosecutor, Renata was also part of the prosecution. As she stood up, she flashed Alejandro a mocking grin. Suddenly, the courtroom doors swung open and 3 officers entered, followed by a woman in handcuffs. It was Viola. Alejandro felt his breath catch in his throat. She looked exactly as she did when she was taken away 2 months ago. Of course, she had lost some weight, and her hairstyle was different, but her face still bore the same expression of sorrow and hopelessness. They escorted her to a special area for the defendant, enclosed by 4 transparent glass panels. "The defense, please," the judge requested. Alejandro's attorney nodded, and he followed him to the podium. He didn't look around in the courtroom because he knew that people's faces were frozen in astonishment, and Renata was likely shooting daggers at him with her furious gaze. However, when he reached the lectern, he had to raise his head. What he saw first was Renata's outraged expression, and she seemed ready to kill him right there. Unfortunately, he couldn't comfort Viola, as she was out of his reach, but he was confident that she would be proud of him. That thought comforted him. "Renata Borrego, you are the victim in the case of the abduction of your children. You claim that they were stolen a month after their birth while you were in a coma. Is that correct?" The judge inquired. "Yes, Your Honor," Renata replied. "The defense, what do you have to say?" The judge continued. Before Alejandro began speaking, his attorney addressed the court. "Your Honor, it's quite simple. There was no abduction as such. On the day Renata Borrego gave birth to twins, Viola Gonzalez was her midwife. Before Renata Borrego lost consciousness, she asked Viola Gonzalez for a favor. I quote the witness, "Please take care of them, don't give them to my parents." It seemed that these words didn't entirely convince the judge. "Can you provide compelling evidence that this is indeed what happened?" The judge inquired. "Yes, Your Honor. In this room, there are 3 people who were present at the clinic on the day Renata Borrego gave birth. They are witnesses and can confirm my words." Following this statement, 3 people were called to testify, all of them women. Among them was Lilia, who had taken over as the head midwife after Viola's departure, Sara, who had served as a midwife, and another nurse. The judge questioned each of them, and they all testified the same. That's exactly how it happened. Renata did ask Viola to take care of her children, they confirmed. Renata gave Alejandro a condemning look. At that moment, she realized that she was walking on thin ice because the 3 witnesses formed a strong line of defense. However, her attorney also had a compelling argument that, she hoped, would outweigh all of the defense's claims. "Your Honor," Renata's attorney began, drawing attention to himself. "Please take into consideration the fact that Renata's physical condition did not allow her to make such significant decisions. As you are aware, after those words, she fell into a coma, which indicates that her consciousness was clouded." The courtroom buzzed again as people began discussing the details they had just heard. "Your Honor," Alejandro began, "for 7 years, the children have grown up under the care of a single mother. She was able to raise them into well-behaved young boys, providing them with a proper education and a nurturing home environment, which cannot be said for Renata and her parents." "Please, clarify," the attorney whispered to his client. "I didn't want to use this as an argument, but I have to. Renata has been struggling with alcohol addiction for a long time. I lived with the children in her parents' house for the past 2 months, and during this time, I understood that it's not a suitable place for my children." An assistant approached the judge and placed some documents in front of him. "You can verify this through the photographs I personally took," Alejandro continued. "But that's not all. I've witnessed my children being subjected to physical abuse by their grandparents, their own flesh and blood. I had to protect them from physical harm, and their biological mother, Renata, is in no condition to raise them. I believe that this is not the right environment for the children." Independent experts from the Child Welfare Commission were invited to the house and assessed the situation. "Their report is on your desk, Your Honor," added the attorney. Renata let out a quiet groan and cursed under her breath. She realized that this was a complete failure. The court adjourned for deliberation, and everyone in the courtroom had a moment to catch their breath. Many people supported Alejandro, and some approached him to express their sympathy. Viola smiled from behind the bars and thanked him with her eyes. He was proud of the work he had done. Finally, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence once more. The judge returned, and everyone awaited the verdict with bated breath. The measured strikes of the gavel resounded 3 times. The court has decided to recognize Michaelo and Rocio Antonio Valiente, along with Viola Gonzalez, as the legal guardians of the minors. All previous charges against Viola Gonzalez are dropped, proclaimed the judge, overriding the rising commotion in the courtroom. He struck the gavel again. The biological mother, Renata Borrego, will be allowed to visit the children at specified times to be determined after she completes rehabilitation. The court is adjourned. There will be no further appeals. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Alejandro couldn't fathom how many people supported him. Viola's handcuffs were removed, and she rushed into her husband's arms. "I missed you so much," she cried. "Everything is fine now, we will be okay," he reassured her. The children surrounded them, clinging to their beloved mother. Viola hugged and kissed them. She hadn't seen her poor darlings for 2 months and was uncertain if she would ever see them again. She held onto her children for a long time, leading them by the hand all the way out of the courthouse. There, they got into a taxi and headed to the hotel. The next day, the plane carried them away from the city that had become their home, back to their beloved hometown. It was there that their happy life had begun, and for Viola, it would continue. Finally, the family had found peace again, everything had stabilized, and they resumed their lives as before. After compulsory treatment, the court allowed Renata to visit the children once a month on a mutually agreed-upon day with their guardians. 2 months after her release from the clinic, she had been conspicuously absent. It seemed she was still very upset about losing the case, but Viola and Alejandro had no desire to see her, so they hadn't attempted to contact her. However, on a beautiful summer day, she called. Renata said she would visit the children in 2 days to spend time with them. She apologized for her behavior and assured them that she held no grudges, she simply wanted to see her children. Viola was still hostile towards her former friend, but she had to endure it. "Are you sure everything will be okay?" Rocio asked during breakfast. "Of course, sweetheart. We're doing this because you need to know your other mother. It wouldn't be fair if she couldn't spend time with you. Okay?" Viola reassured the boy. "Yes, I guess so, but she's mean and cruel." "No, she won't be cruel to you. I'll be there the whole time. Let's try to have a normal conversation with her, at least." The doorbell rang, and the boys got nervous. Their father was at work, and in their eyes, he was their biggest protection against this scary woman. "Come in," Viola's voice echoed from the hallway. "The boys are in the living room." A woman with long white hair entered the kitchen. It was Renata. She didn't look like she did when she was at her parents' house. She was no longer drunk and disheveled. Now, her hair was neatly styled, her makeup was good, and she was dressed decently. She appeared quite presentable, and this image inspired trust. "We're having breakfast," Viola explained, sitting down at the table and gesturing for Renata to join. "Do you like pancakes?" "Of course, we used to enjoy them together when..." Here, Renata faltered and fell silent. She realized that she shouldn't have brought up those times when they were best friends. "Yes, I remember," Viola broke the awkward silence. "So, can you eat some?" "I made too many." Renata gladly agreed, and they awkwardly discussed the weather, the boys' favorite breakfasts, and their school achievements. The conversations were quite polite, and Viola was starting to relax. The idea of tolerating Renata's presence in her home once a month didn't seem as dreadful as she had initially thought. "Someone is calling." "I'll be back in a minute," Viola said with a smile. The boys were slightly worried about their mother leaving, but Renata kept them engaged in conversation, so they got a little distracted. "They've called me into work, so unfortunately, I have to leave you for today," Viola addressed the boys. "Renata, can you look after them today? They have a PlayStation, you can play with them if you want. It's a great way to bond. And in the evening, you can watch a movie together. Just please, nothing too scary, otherwise, they won't sleep without a nightlight for a week." "Mom," Kilo protested, embarrassed. Okay, I'll be quiet. You two are the bravest. Love you. I'll be back in the evening. Please don't cause any trouble here without me. In any case, Dad will be back earlier." Viola left the house. "How should we call you? Aunt or the other mom?" Rocio asked. Renata was slightly annoyed by this inappropriate question, but she didn't show it. "I think it will be easier for everyone if you just call me Renata." The boys chuckled with relief. "All right, Renata," Kilo said, looking at his brother and gauging his reaction. Rocio smiled too. "So, boys, I can see you're already having fun. But why don't we continue the fun and go to the amusement park? Who's up for some rides?" "Amusement park? Didn't Mom say we should stay home?" Kilo asked in surprise. "Your mom said I should just watch over you. That doesn't mean we can't go have some fun. So, get ready, and we'll leave in half an hour. Do you have a car? I thought you came here by plane." "Yes, my dear, but you can always rent a car. So, let's get ready and go ride some real American roller coasters." The kids happily scattered to their rooms to prepare for the trip to the park, while Renata remained in the kitchen, finishing her coffee. Her plan was working perfectly so far, and she felt a sense of satisfaction in her careful planning and favorable circumstances. "Koku, I'm home," Viola announced herself as she entered the apartment. It was surprisingly quiet and dark. Perhaps the kids had already gone to bed? It was already 11 o'clock in the evening, so most likely Renata had put them to bed, Viola assumed. Maybe their friendship hadn't completely deteriorated, and they could at least partially restore their past good relationship. She checked her bedroom. Alejandro wasn't there yet, but he had warned that he might be working late tonight, so Viola wasn't particularly concerned. Antonio or Alejandro, she sometimes got confused about what to call him now, oversaw security at one of the nightclubs and often returned late. The woman poured herself some coffee with pink petals and sat down in the kitchen, scrolling through her social media feeds. She found it strange that Renata had left without waiting for her. Maybe she had fallen asleep while putting one of the boys to bed? Viola decided to check the room. What she saw, or rather, didn't see, shocked her. The beds were empty, and clothes were scattered all around in disarray. She rushed to Kilo's room, where she found the same scene. Viola began nervously dialing Renata's number, but it was unavailable. She tried again, with the same result. Then Viola tried calling Alejandro, but he didn't answer either. What the hell is going on? Where did they all disappear? Did they decide to run away with my children, leaving me alone? Viola thought. However, she found Alejandro's passport, which he wouldn't have left if he intended to run away. Perhaps something happened while she was away. Could they have been invaded by a robber who took them hostage? Viola's mind raced with various thoughts, but deep down, she had already deciphered the mysterious disappearance. Renata had kidnapped her children. Viola made another attempt to call Alejandro, but it was futile. The only remaining option was to call the police. She dialed the number and waited for the operator to answer. They said that a patrol car would arrive in a few minutes, but those minutes felt like an eternity. Viola nervously bit her fingernails, a habit she had when under extreme stress. In some places, small scars had formed from her nails. The doorbell rang, and she promptly opened it, inviting the police officers in. There were two officers with imposing physiques, which inspired trust and somehow calmed her. Okay, ma'am, please repeat once more what the boys were wearing when you left for work, the officer asked once again. I told you, they were in their pajamas, and when I entered their rooms, I saw their clothes scattered on the floor. They've obviously changed their clothes, Viola replied hysterically. The officer suggested that she sit down and have a glass of water, which she did. After calming down a bit, she said, "My husband, he." But at that moment, Alejandro entered the apartment, and his eyes widened in horror as he quickly noticed the people in police uniforms who were rummaging through the apartment and taking pictures. "What's happening here, Viola?" Alejandro asked, shocked. A dark-skinned man with a sturdy build who held a pen and a piece of paper looked at him. "Sir, please come over here. We'll quickly explain the situation to you. There's no time to waste searching for your children." "My children? Viola. Where are my Kilo and Rocio?" Alejandro shouted. Viola couldn't take the pressure and burst into tears right before everyone's eyes. "Sir, you're wasting time. Focus on your wife and children," the man advised Alejandro. The husband realized his mistake and approached the officer with a similarly horrified look in his eyes. "Your children were left in the care of their biological mother for the whole day. Your wife left for work, leaving the boys with her. Did she call you during the day?" The officer inquired. "No, I didn't receive any calls. My phone died while I was at work, and I couldn't get in touch," Alejandro said, approaching his wife and sitting next to her. The officer continued to question both of them. "Do your children have phones or other means of communication?" Viola pondered. Due to stress, she didn't immediately grasp the officer's questions, but then it dawned on her, and she felt relieved. "Yes, they have mobile phones. We bought them so that they could call us from school in case of an emergency." Viola immediately realized her mistake. Why hadn't she thought to call my Kilo or Rocio? They would have answered, as they were clever kids who would have come up with something. "Have you called them?" The officer asked sternly, not allowing her to finish. "No, I didn't think about it." But the officer didn't let her finish. "All right, give me their numbers." Viola provided her children's phone numbers and fell silent. She looked at Alejandro, seeking support in his eyes. Her husband clasped her shoulders, and they waited together for the officer to speak. "Rodrigo," the officer said into his radio, "check the numbers I'm sending you now, trace their locations." The police officer glanced at the worried couple. "Don't worry, we'll find them. We've located people even when we received reports that they'd been missing for several days. Everything will be fine." The radio crackled, and a voice spoke. "I've found them, Samuel, but they're in completely different locations." It's strange, the children were together. When the couple heard this information, they panicked. Could Renata have killed them? But that was impossible, she wouldn't have harmed her own children. The officer was also taken aback, but he ordered into his radio, "Go to these addresses and have them thoroughly search the area." "Understood," the voice in the radio replied. "Do you have any idea where they might have gone?" the officer asked. "To our hometown," Alejandro unexpectedly stated. "Renata came to us from Toronto. She might have rented a car to go there. They wouldn't have let her leave at the airport." "But it's quite a long drive," the officer objected. "Renata wouldn't be deterred by that," Alejandro replied. An hour later, they were on the road. The investigator informed them that his team had found 2 phones but nothing else. Perhaps Renata had done this to throw them off her trail. Alejandro and Viola were riding in a car with the police officers. They found one of the stolen cars abandoned in a field, and inside were the children's belongings. Viola found my Kilo's favorite sweater there. "Alejandro, will we really find them?" Viola sobbed, clutching the only item that connected them to their children that they had found during the search. "Viola, everything will be fine. We'll catch up to them, we'll have enough time." "The main thing is not to lose hope," her husband reassured her, though he himself doubted the effectiveness of this pursuit. They proceeded to another crime scene where a man reported his car stolen. She blocked my path, pointed a gun at me, and threw me out of the car. I didn't even have time to object before I found myself on the street without my car and my dog, the man recounted emotionally. Did your car have a dog inside? The officer asked, noting down all the details. Yes, they stole my little girl, too. The victim provided his car's license plate number and indicated the direction the crazy woman might have driven. What did the children look like? Viola pressed the man. Were they harmed? Did they have any bruises? No, the man replied, alarmed by Viola's reaction. They looked tired, but they didn't try to run away or ask for help. It seemed that Renata had manipulated their minds, possibly spinning any kind of tale, like they were going to visit her and their mom would be waiting for them, or she had simply frightened them so much that they obeyed her without question. She could have lied about anything, and her cunning was evident. I've got them, one of the guys in uniform told the officer. They're on the highway, we can catch up to them. Get in the car, the tired officer ordered the couple. They were already driving at breakneck speed. With each passing second, Viola thought they would eventually crash. Alejandro and Viola were in the car with two police officers. The first officer was driving, while the second was communicating over the radio. Other police vehicles followed closely behind them. Suddenly, around a highway turn, they spotted the car with the same license plate. It was Renata and their children. I've got them, let's start the chase. Spread out on the road and block her from turning anywhere. Execute. The officer shouted into the radio to his colleagues. We're almost catching up to them, he told the trembling parents. Renata Borrego immediately stopped the vehicle. He yelled through a megaphone, "You're breaking the law. I repeat, stop the vehicle, or we will open fire." Renata's response shocked Viola, both figuratively and literally. A bullet whizzed over her shoulder. After recovering from the initial shock, she saw an injured officer in front of her, sitting next to the driver. The bullet had grazed his arm. Did she really have a gun? Viola grew even more worried about her children. The car swerved from side to side, attempting to evade the pursuing officers. Then the unexpected happened. A bullet pierced the driver's hand, shattering the windshield. Unable to control the car, he crashed into a barrier. It felt like an eternity to Viola, with a constant ringing and a deafening roar in her ears. When she opened her eyes, she saw blood. A lot of blood. The officer, who had been sitting next to the driver, had been thrown through the windshield onto the ground. The driver had passed out but was breathing, as indicated by the rising and falling of his chest. He was likely suffering from multiple fractures due to the impact. Viola understood that she couldn't help him on her own, so she somehow managed to get out of the car. Two police vehicles and an ambulance were already approaching. Viola showed them where the people were, then rushed to another car. They haven't gotten far. Give me your car. I'll catch them. She screamed in hysteria. You're not allowed to drive, one of the officers said. Calm down. Viola got right in the face of the sergeant and grabbed him by the collar. Her eyes were burning with anger. My children are in mortal danger right now, and I don't give a damn about your rules and laws. Give me your damn car, or I swear I'll force you in there, and you'll get behind the wheel. Fine, the frightened officer agreed. I really like your plan, just calm down. Please get in the car, I'll drive. Viola immediately got into the car. A young sergeant took the driver's seat. He seemed to be new to the police force, and Viola might cost him his job, or even his life. But right now, her only concern was her children and their safety. They're right there, speed up. Viola screamed. I can't. We'll crash, and that's basically murder. Hold the wheel, we're swapping seats now, Viola declared. You don't have the right. I have the right to do anything when it comes to my children. Either you switch with me right now, or your family will receive word that their son died in a car accident. Viola was lying, of course, but her threats seemed to make an impression on the young officer. He kept the wheel steady while Viola struggled to switch places with him. In an instant, she was sitting on his lap, and the young officer was in the passenger seat. "Look at the road, not me," the enraged mother yelled. Finally, with Viola fully in control, she hit the gas pedal. They were closing in on the car they were chasing. At that moment, something terrible occurred. As they reached an enormous speed while driving onto a bridge, something happened inside Renata's car. It swerved abruptly and, at full speed, crashed into a steel pillar, causing it to burst into flames. "No!" Viola's heart-wrenching scream pierced the air. "Oh God, no!" Pulling up at a safe distance to prevent the imminent explosion from reaching their car, Viola dashed out and ran toward the burning vehicle. She struggled to open the rear door, which was scorching hot, like molten lava. Viola screamed in pain but pressed on into the fiery inferno. She prayed fervently for her children's survival, hoping her prayers would be answered. She managed to pull out Mikilo and then Rocio. Both were unconscious but alive, which was the most important thing. Take them to the rescue teams and provide the necessary help. Call an ambulance here too. Viola quickly ordered a nearby young man who had approached. He nodded, scooped up the children in his arms, and placed them in his car. Within moments, they were speeding away in the opposite direction. Now, Viola needed to find out what had happened to Renata. She hurried to the driver's door and, remembering the earlier burn, wrapped her hand in her shirt before pulling the door open. What she saw horrified her more than anything that day. Half of Renata's face was severely burned, and shards of metal had pierced her chest, leaving her impaled. But what was most distressing was that Renata was still conscious. She could barely turn her head, and there was only a faint rasp coming from her lips as blood oozed from her shattered mouth. "Stay quiet, help is on its way." "Hang in there a little longer," Viola yelled. As angry as she was with her kidnapper, this was her friend, albeit one who had betrayed her. Viola couldn't just stand by and watch Renata die. "Viola, forgive me," Renata whispered with her last strength. Viola squatted down, her hand on Renata's shoulder, offering support. "Renata, my dear Renata, why did we get into such a mess?" Viola said as a tear rolled down her cheek. "Viola, I won't survive," Renata murmured, coughing up blood. "God, Viola, he'll take me to heaven, but I want you to know I never wished you any harm. I want you to forgive me." Viola began to cry and, through her tears, whispered, "I forgive you, Renata. Of course, I forgive you, and I still love you. Go in peace, my dear. Our children." Viola didn't get to finish her sentence. Her friend took her last breath before her eyes. Viola let out a heart-rending scream of unbearable emotional pain. She had lost someone dear, someone who had brought true happiness into her life. In spite of everything, it was thanks to Renata that she had her husband and children, a real family. Happiness is having loved ones who stand by you no matter what. Viola was immensely grateful to Renata, the person who had introduced her to that life. For the rest of her life, Viola worked to restore Renata's good name in the eyes of her children, their children. She succeeded. Her husband remained devoted to her until his last breath, and they lived a long and happy life. Together, they brought one more precious life into the world, a daughter, whom they named Renata, in honor of their tragically lost friend and the mother of their elder sons.